Hi, I'm the history guy. I have a degree in history and I love history, and if you love history too, this is the channel for you. We were at dinner with friends the other night, and when their daughter found out that I was the history guy, she asked a simple question. What do you think of George Washington's wooden teeth? Well, it's an interesting question because, to tell you the truth, I had never thought much about George Washington's teeth, but when you research them, they're really quite interesting. George Washington's teeth tell us a lot about our first president. They were very important to George Washington. His letters and journals are full of complaints about teeth pain and questions about the care and maintenance of his many sets of dentures. His ledgers are full of expenses for dental care. His false teeth affected his personality. It affected the way he interacted with the public. At one point, it might have even affected the Revolutionary War. And they raise a thorny question about the nature of America's most famous founding father. And really, how often do you really get a chance to talk about the interesting subject of the history of dentistry? There is some archaeological evidence that the practice of dentistry might go all the way back to the Stone Age, but the American Dental Association sees a Sumerian tablet from 5000 BC referencing toothworms as the beginning of dentistry. The tomb of Hesse-Re, an Egyptian scribe from around 2600 BC, has inscribed on the wall that he was the greatest among those who work with teeth, marking him perhaps history's first professional dentist. The practice of dental prosthetics goes all the way back to the Etruscans of northern Italy, who as early as 700 BC were replacing missing teeth by using an animal or human teeth that was strung to the teeth next door using gold wire. And we see similar tooth replacement going on in Egyptian mummies as early as 200 BC. And if you didn't know it, wooden teeth were actually a thing. Dentures carved of wood were first seen in Japan in the 1500s. But the practice of dentistry went through a revolution in the 1700s, and that was largely due to a Frenchman named Pierre Fauchard, who was credited with creating the practice of modern dentistry with the publication of his book, The Surgical Dentist, in 1728. Fauchard invented and diagrammed many tools that dentists still use today, including the first known diagram of a dental drill. And it was in the 18th century that dentures and dental prosthetics started to be made out of ivory, sometimes whalebone, but also from more exotic materials like elephant or hippopotamus, and usually included real teeth, sometimes taken from animals, usually horses or donkeys, or real human teeth. And how did they get those? Well, we'll talk about that later. George Washington was a famously fit, strong, and athletic person, but he suffered from tooth pain his entire life. His journal shows that his first tooth removal occurred at the young age of 24. His journals and letters are full of complaints about teeth and teeth pain. It has been suggested that his dental problems were caused by periodontal disease, which was the result of unfortunate genetics and the absolute lack of dental hygiene practices in the 18th century, and those conspired to cost him his teeth one by one. By the time he was elected president in 1789, he had just one natural tooth left, a lower bicuspid, and even that had to be removed in 1796. He gave it to his dentist, who reportedly had it encased in glass and put at the end of his watch fob. Washington's dentures had a profound effect upon him. His journals and letters are full of complaints about pain and ill-fitting dentures and an obsession with the maintenance, repair, and cost of those dentures. The pain impacted him his entire life and might be part of the reason that he was known to have a short temper. The dentures also impacted his ability to speak and create certain sounds with his tongue, and the ill-fitting devices with springs and hooks would have been an embarrassment to someone who was concerned with decorum and appearance, and it might be a partial explanation for why George Washington was so famously brief in his public speaking. His second inaugural address, for example, is still the shortest in history, at just 135 words. We don't even know what George Washington actually looked like because his dentures altered his appearance. He complained that they pushed out his lips, and his adopted son, George Washington Parke Custis, described it as a marked change. In fact, most of the portraits that we have of George Washington show a face that is distorted by dentures, none more obvious than the paintings done by Gilbert Stuart in the 1790s, upon which the famous portrait on the $1 bill is based. His dentures so affected his appearance that in 2005, all the remaining sets of George Washington's dentures were laser scanned as part of a project to try to create more realistic sculptures of George Washington to display at Mount Vernon. And while they affected his appearance, they also might have affected his personality, and might be a big part of the reason that he was seen as being such a stern persona. I mean, this was a man who was known to enjoy dancing, but who rarely smiled because it would show his tooth problems, and who had to avoid a hearty laugh because since the dentures were spring-loaded, that could literally shoot the dentures from his mouth. And according to George Washington's Mount Vernon website, there was at least one point where Washington's bad teeth might have impacted the Revolutionary War. A packet of correspondence was captured by the British and read by the British General Sir Henry Clinton, and included in there was a personal note from Washington to his dentist asking for a set of dental tools. And that personal note convinced Clinton that the packet was real and that he could trust the information he got from the packet. But the military correspondence in the packet implied that Washington and the French General Rochambeau were planning to stay in the New York area, not move south against General Cornwallis in Yorktown. And that might be part of the reason that Sir Henry Clinton failed to reinforce or evacuate Cornwallis in order to prevent the defeat at Yorktown. But despite the legend, none of George Washington's many sets of dentures were made out of wood. Wooden dentures might still have been in use in Japan in that era, but in North America and Europe, dentures were almost exclusively made out of ivory and real teeth, either animal or human teeth. And of course, being wealthy, George Washington was able to afford the very best kinds of dentures. But the problem with ivory teeth and even used real teeth is that they did stain easily and could turn brown. And that might be the genesis of the legend that George Washington's false teeth were made out of wood. But that finally leads us to the difficult question. If dentures were being made out of human teeth, where did they get them? Well, the teeth were usually pulled from criminals who were executed. They were sometimes taken by grave robbers. Dentists at the time were known to pay people to give up their teeth, unsavory income for the destitute. And they were often pulled from the mouths of soldiers that were killed in battle. So many were taken from the dead after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 that for many years thereafter in England, false teeth were referred to as Waterloo teeth. And as for George Washington himself, we know from a letter that he preserved his own teeth as they were pulled, and those might have been used in Washington's dentures. But perhaps most disturbing is a notation in a ledger in 1784 by the person that was managing Mount Vernon while Washington was fighting the Revolution that said, "By cash, paid Negroes for 9 teeth." And while it's hard to tell exactly what this notation is talking about, it implies that George Washington possibly had teeth pulled from his own slaves to use in his dentures. And while we don't have proof that these teeth ever wound up in any of George Washington's dentures, it's something that people really don't want to believe of the first president, of a man who seemed to be a progressive, who, for example, freed his own slaves upon his death. But the thing is, pulling the teeth of slaves for your own dentures would have been a perfectly acceptable practice for a slaveholder in the 18th century, and George Washington was still a creature of his era. Thankfully today, dentures are made out of porcelain, and that frees us from the moral quandary of where to collect our spare teeth. But George Washington's not wooden teeth do teach us many lessons. They teach us that culture is part of history, that the state of medicine can affect the affairs of state. They teach us that things that we take for granted today were terrible pains in the past. And perhaps they teach us that the people that we idolize, our heroes, are maybe not as perfect as we hoped, and maybe more than we imagined, creatures of their time, for good and for ill. And of course, they remind us to always brush and floss, lessons that should not be forgotten. I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, then please go ahead and click that thumbs up button that is there on your left. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest another topic for the History Guy, then write those in the comment section and I will be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 minutes more forgotten history, all you need to do is click that subscribe button that is there on your right.